So Ken Mackriell.
So good evening, my name's Ken. I'm basically a social historian, but my passion is antiquity. This particular talk I want to give tonight is actually about what we call the Spartan Mirage. Now, okay, let's be honest, who of you knows more about Sparta from 300 than anything else? Yeah? Big muscular dudes, lots of shouting, kicking people into wells, that kind of thing. Well, tonight I want to talk about what we call the Spartan Mirage, and it's what a phrase historians use to describe how Sparta has been received throughout antiquity into the modern usage. So this is probably the most modern retelling of Sparta, or a very specific instance in the history of Sparta. And so we're going to go to that point, and I'm going to start there in the middle of Spartan history. And all the dates from now on are going to be in BC, they're going to be before Common Era. So well over 2,000 years ago. So let's have a look at this. We're going to start with 480 BCE and the last stand at Thermopylae. This was the moment in 300 where those big muscular men in the tiny pants found themselves exterminated. Yay, Spartans lose. So the story goes, and this is the story that we've received, that a huge invading Persian army was held off by 300 noble Spartan badasses for 3 terrible days, allowing the rest of the plucky but kind of inferior Greek nations the chance to mobilise a defence. Now, refusing to retreat, despite their deaths being inevitable, the 300 Spartans leave us with one of the most famous epitaphs in history. And it goes, that's the monument at Thermopylae. The nudity, well, there is a reason for nudity in Greek art, and it's nothing to do with what they actually wore. So the epitaph reads, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger, passing by, that here, obedience to their laws we lie." It's very evocative, isn't it? So this is the keystone event of the Spartan myth. It's a story of obedience, fearlessness, courage, selflessness, patriotism. But what kind of society produced such astonishing and feared soldiers? And how much of the myth is actually true? Well, separating the fact from myth is tricky due to what I described, the phenomenon that we call the Spartan Mirage. And this is an idealisation of Spartan culture that began in antiquity and continues today. You must have noticed things like the Spartan race, Spartan mixed martial arts gym, there's even like Spartan nutrition, which we'll come on to Spartan food later, it's not pretty. So, by unpicking this phenomenon, we can gain insight into one of the most extreme societies in antiquity and perhaps how it relates to our culture today. But all the significant ancient sources relating to Sparta were written by either their enemies or their admirers. We have no authentic Spartan voices. They didn't write anything down for us. This obviously provides us with a bit of a problem when we're trying to tease out the truth. But we're having to rely on Herodotus, Thucydides, Xenophon, Socrates, Plato, Plutarch, and even comedians like Aristophanes. Most of these people were Athenians. The Athenians were the arch enemies of the Spartans. And these sources present us with apparently conflicting characteristics. So, there are qualities that we as moderns in a liberal democracy may regard as positive, such as self-sacrifice, egalitarianism, the enfranchisement of women, a rejection of material wealth, political stability, physical courage, positive stuff. But these sources also depict, a military oligarchy that dominated brutalised underclass, dehumanising cruelty, institutionalised child abuse, xenophobia, eugenics, infanticide. Maybe not so big on the agenda these days, unless you read the Daily Mail. So were the Spartans a nation of selfless idealists or fascist despots? We're going to try and piece that together. So let's go back a few hundred years before the events of Thermopylae, to the 8th century BCE and the beginnings of the Great Spartan experiment. So, contrary to what Gerard Butler says, this is Sparta. So this is the Eurotas Valley between 2 mountain ranges. And as you can see, it's idyllic, it's beautiful, it's also fertile, which is a big deal in Greece. So first thing, Sparta was not actually called Sparta. That's the first bit of the myth we're going to blow apart. It was actually called Lacedaemon. Now in the 8th century BC, Hellas, what Greece still calls itself today, was actually a collection of poleis, city-states. So if you imagine, the dominant village gives the polis its identity. So for example, if Eastbourne was the dominant village, Polegate, Willingdon, East Dean would all consider themselves Eastbourne. Even though they had their own separate identities, they would still be Eastbourne. So Sparta was actually the largest village in Lacedaemon. And that's this is the Peloponnese, this is the southern part of Greece. So the end of the Dark Age, as Greece is coming out of its Dark Age after the Bronze Age collapse, which is another talk, population is increasing in Greece, but there's actually very little fertile land. There's very little farmable land in Greece. It's extremely mountainous. And this shortage of farmland was actually leading to a lot of civil unrest. Now, the Greeks hit on a fantastic idea of dealing with their population explosion. They started to colonise overseas. They just sent out colonies all across the Mediterranean, all the way through the east, the Levant, North Africa, Spain, France, Italy, Sicily, loads of Greek colonies. Now, Sparta didn't join the overseas land grab. They founded one overseas colony in Italy, Taras, or Taranto as it is now called. But they came up with an alternative plan, which is actually a bit lighter on resources. Instead, they invaded and subjugated Laconia. And realising they were onto a winner, then they marched west and spent 20 years doing exactly the same to Messenia. Now, this conquest concluded around 720 BCE, and the surviving occupants of these nations were assigned one of two social statuses. So the lucky few became the perioikoi, those who dwell around oikoi households, and these were the artisan class. So these were people with skills, effectively. They were nominally free, though they weren't considered full citizens, and they lived a life very similar to other families of similar socio-economic status in the rest of Greece. The unlucky majority of Laconia and Messenia's population were made into helots, and these were the living property of the Spartan state. They were basically a hereditary slave caste. As you can see, that's quite a large area. There'd be a lot of slaves in that area. Now, the Spartan polis now controlled over 3,000 square miles, a mostly fertile country. They had an indentured workforce, and began accumulating prodigious wealth by standards of the period. Now, in this Sparta, love, luxury, and feminine beauty were celebrated, as the Spartan poet Alcman illustrates in this countdown of Spartans' 10 hottest ladies. Bear with me, the school kids are a bit racing. There is no abundance of purple sufficient to protect us, nor our speckled serpent bracelets of solid gold, nor our Lydian cap adornment for tender-eyed girls, nor Nano's hair, nor Areta, who looks like a goddess, nor Thulakis, nor Cleostella, nor will you go to Aenis Imbrota and say, I wish Astaphis was mine, and I wish Philia would look at me, and Demereta, and lovely Themis. No, it is Haggis Ecora who exalts me with love. It was all a bit racy in Sparta by then. Now, men were wealthy, girls were gorgeous, and slaves did all the work. All was idyllic, if you belonged to the Lacedaemonian elite. But, as with all good things, this 50-year party had to come to an end. In 669 BCE, Sparta was defeated in battle by Argos. And in this disarray that followed, the Messenians revolted. And this is the moment where Sparta begins her transformation. So let's think back to Alcman's love poetry, yeah? Purple, gold, girls, stuff. Now compare it with the verses of a poet called Tartaeus, who composed these lines shortly after the Messenian uprising, about a generation later, and see if you can pick out any subtle shifts in tone or theme. Okay, any English graduates? Going to need you on side here, okay? So, this is the man of worth in time of war. Soon he turns back the foeman's sharp-edged battle lines and strenuously stems the tide of arms. His own dear life he loses in the front line felled, his breast, his boss-head shield, pierced by many a wound, and of his cuirass, all the front. But he has brought glory upon his father, army, town. His death is mourned by young and old alike. The whole community feels the keen loss of its own. I think it's reasonable to assert that something had changed in the Spartan national character at this point. So Sparta would enslave their neighbours, but the only way to keep them enslaved was to establish absolute military dominance over them. And to do that, they needed an army perpetually ready to fight. But at this time, there were no professional soldiers in Hellas. So every combatant was a self-equipped volunteer. It's like an entire army of reservists. Generally, these people were from landowning classes. They were smallholders and farmers. And because of this, war was seasonal by necessity. They looked a bit like this, which is not really leather pants and stuff, is it? This is a linen corselet, bronze helmet and greaves, massive shield, big pointy spear. So these citizen soldiers were known as hoplites, which translates roughly as men-at-arms, from the word hoplon, which means military equipment or your kind of complete loadout. And these amateurs deployed in combat in family groups, lohoi. And these family groups mirrored the domestic hierarchies of the household. So dad was in charge, uncle was the second in command, older brothers and cousins would watch out for the younger ones, and so on. And these locoi were amassed in a densely packed formation called a phalanx, a block approximately 8 ranks deep and as wide as possible. And the phalanx was a very simple formation, and it had to be because these isolated households didn't train together. They only came together in times of war. So what was it like being in a phalanx? Well, so battle is joined. 2 phalanxes face each other and they begin advancing, singing their war hymns. And they have to advance slowly with their shields overlapping. They cannot just rush into combat because the ground is very broken. If a phalanx comes apart, the fight is over. But when they're getting very close, the moment called the dromos happens, the charge. It's a short charge and the 2 front lines clash together. Boom! And you have to hope your promachoi, the front fighters, held the line. Now these men, the promachoi, were the ballsiest, most experienced, most heavily armoured hoplites. But once those 2 shield walls hit, they were completely trapped in their shields. They were unable to move. While behind them, ranks 2 and 3 did the fighting with the spears. So if you can imagine, you're in the front, you're just in this kind of big dish of a shield, you haven't got a clue what's going on. You're in a big bronze bucket on your head, and you're hoping that the dudes behind you are killing the dudes in front of you. You have no idea. You're just hoping you're not going to get killed by a spear coming over the top. So you can imagine, it's loads of fun. And meanwhile, the rear 5 ranks are pushing forward in what is called the Othismos, the pushing war, and they're attempting to grind over the enemy. So if you're at the front, you're basically like the front of a plough with hundreds of horses pushing you, and you're stuck in this dish. So eventually casualties will mount up in the front ranks. Spears will begin to kill the occasional person, not that many people, because wearing all that stuff is actually quite hard to get a blow in. Eventually, holes would appear. One phalanx would break and rout, and that moment was called the trophy. And that's where the real killing would begin. Mostly people being killed by spear to the back as they fled. The victors will then erect a temporary monument from the gear of the enemy dead, at the point where they broke, and that's where we get the word trophy from. So when you get your nice little golfing trophy, kind of laminated plastic, I did so well at ping pong, I came second, think back to the fact that it was originally a mound of armour covered in your enemy's blood. Maybe have a little different meaning for you when your son comes home and says, I did really well at football, Dad. Who did you kill? So, as you can imagine, no one wants to lose this kind of fight. And Spartans decided they never would again after Argos defeated them because the cost was just too high. Their society was actually extremely fragile. If the slaves revolted, they had to put all of their energy into putting them back down. That made them incredibly vulnerable to external attack. So they decided they would transform their society and thus become unbeatable. And the process began with the reforms of Lycurgus, which translates as the wolf worker. And this is a real Spartan legend. Now, let's assume Lycurgus was a real person. We don't know. We only have, effectively, enemy reports to go by. But what did he legislate? Well, the complete reinvention of the Spartan polis, from a conventional Hellenic oligarchy into something completely unheard of. And it begins with the fundamental structure of the state. So Sparta became a combined monarchy, oligarchy and gerontocracy. So a gerontocracy is a society ruled by old people. At the top were 2 hereditary kings, power sharing, who held the executive, military, administrative and religious roles in the state. So when Leonidas marches off with his 300 and everyone's going, oh no, the king's going to go and die, there was another king at home. Okay, yeah, we lose one king, but we got loads of them. Below them, below the kings, were this organisation called the Gerousia, the Council of Elders, and these were men of 60 plus years, which was an extremely rare achievement in 8th century Greece to actually make it to 60 years old. It was a big deal. From that group were selected the ephors, the overseers, and these were the moral and legal guardians of the state, and they were selected to police this new Sparta and ensure absolute adherence to the law. Then came the ranks of the homoioi, the full Spartan citizens who had a voice in the assembly, and they enjoyed certain particular significant privileges, but these privileges had to be earned. Every male citizen of Sparta between the ages of 20 and 60 was to be a soldier. That's it. Soldiering was your lot. If you consider that the average male lifespan at the time was 45 years, then that really was your lot. And here's where it gets nasty. The process of transforming children into tame killers begins at birth. The new Spartan state had a very strict eugenics policy. When a thoroughbred Spartan boy was born, he was scrutinised by the ephors to see if he was a physically suitable specimen. If the infant passed the test, he was returned to his mother. If he failed, he was exposed on a hillside to die. And this may sound appalling to us, but exposure wasn't uncommon in Hellas at the time. It was a poor subsistence level economy, and new children were often an encumbrance on a household and could tip it into destitution or debt slavery. But surviving boys remained with their mother until around 7 years old-ish, when they were inducted into a process called the agoge. And this means the rearing, as in rearing a herd of animals. The state training program that would transform them from a child into a Spartan soldier. And this is a big deal, because no other nation in Hellas at that point had even conceived of a state education system. The idea of the state participating in or standardising the education of its citizenry was a completely unique and revolutionary concept. The process was far from nurturing, however. So the children were submitted to a brutal regime designed to encourage hardiness, self-reliance, group loyalty, fierceness. They went shoeless all year round and were given only one garment a year for warmth, their iconic red cloak. They got that bit right in 300 at least. They slept on beds of reeds, which they pulled out of the river. They were kept perpetually hungry and encouraged to steal food to supplement their rations, and they were whipped if they were caught, not because they had done wrong, because they had got caught. They weren't stealthy enough. They needed to improve a little bit on their ninja skills. So over time, these little creatures hardened into vicious, obedient little youths, ready to be rebuilt as tools of the state, absolutely loyal to its values. So weapons and drill follow next, along with athletics, open hand fighting, the pankration, dance, music, basic literacy, but most importantly they were taught to love agon, where we get the word agony. The struggle that wins glory, and eutaxia, the discipline to hold their place in the line even when death is inevitable. So they learned that the law was their absolute master, and disobedience the ultimate disgrace. They learned to speak laconically, that's where we get the word laconically from. In the manner of their nation, they selected their words very carefully. They used a minimum of words. But most of all, they were to seek the beautiful death in combat. Death in combat was the desired end for all Spartan men. They prepared for it the way we might prepare for a job interview or a first date. They groomed before battle. They oiled their long hair and skin. They polished and repainted their equipment. They sacrificed their eros to sexual love. And unlike the other amateurs with their running and yelling, they walked slowly and calmly into combat, to the sound of the aulos, the twin pipes, singing paeans to love. Now, around puberty, the surviving boys had their heads shaved and were assigned a mentor, an older boy who would introduce them into adult Spartan life. Now, this mentor would assist in providing guidance, training, equipment, lodging, and introduce his boy to a sysition, a mess group of adult Spartans with whom he would dine and socialise with. It was expected that the youth and the mentor would engage in a pederastic relationship to create a bond of trust and love between them. But this was not about eros, the fierce passion of lovers, but philia, the deeper bond of love between true friends. The Greeks had very distinct views on love. It was considered an essential part of the boys' education, this process, or philia. And when they were between 12 and 14 years old, approximately, the truly exceptional students of the agoge were inducted into the cryptia. The cryptia was the adolescent secret police with a very specific mission. The Greeks believed that murder incurred a spiritual pollution that could pollute a whole community if it wasn't purified. But killing in war was exempt of pollution. So once a year, Sparta declared war on its own Hellas. The cryptia would be sent out to stalk the countryside and execute any slaves they could find out after dark. They would creep into unsecured houses, they would murder whole families in their bed. Its political function was very simple, to inculcate terror. The Helots would then be subservient because they never knew when they were going to be murdered. And this mini Stasi often went on to form the king's Hippias, his notes, from the Greek hippos, meaning horse, although they didn't ride. The Spartans really didn't like cavalry. But Leonidas' 300 were almost certainly all veterans of the cryptia. At 20, boys graduated from the agoge. And should they find a welcome in the sysition, they entered adult Spartan society as one of the homioi, frequently translated as peers or equals, but that's actually inaccurate. Homioi means similar. There was plenty of room for ranking best to worst in Spartan culture. And in a homosocial, hyper-competitive society, who was seen as kalos, best, and kakos, worst, was very important to your social status. The graduates were expected to grow their hair long, as an outward symbol of their nobility, which was a hangover from Greek prehistory. While the rest of Greece long ago had abandoned that and had sensible haircuts. but they were to leave their beard untrimmed except for the top lip, which they shaved. This was the super sexy Spartan grooming standard. It was non-negotiable and everybody had to look like that. They dressed identically, without any ostentation. They bunked, trained and ate together within mess and were assigned a plot of farmland cared for by families of helots, from which they were expected to contribute produce and labour for the state. Hunting was a popular way of supplementing their contribution, and it almost certainly tasted better than the dubiously named black soup that they drank, which was a mix of barley, blood and vinegar. Yeah, it's charming, isn't it? People have recreated this shit. It is as bad as you think. It's like liquid black pudding with extra vinegar. Yeah, exactly. So this food stuff was so utterly fucking awful that a witty Sybarite supposedly remarked, "It's no wonder that the Spartans are so keen to die. Have you seen what they eat?" Now, wine was taken watered in all of Greece at the time, but inebriation was actually forbidden by law in Sparta. So once yearly, the helots were forced to drink undiluted wine until they were completely wrecked, and then they were publicly humiliated by the Spartans as a warning to the young citizens against getting pissed. And the lesson was very simple. In a state that's perpetually at war, drunkenness gets you killed. But what if the women in lovely luck about? So girls had it slightly easier at birth, for there was no mandatory inspection for them. Unlike the rest of Greece, who regarded the survival of girl babies as optional, Spartan girls were considered as vital to the well-being of the state as boys. After all, where is the next generation of hoplites going to come from if not from healthy mothers? Spartan women were admired across the Hellenic world and had been since Homeric times. In his bawdy comedy Lysistrata, which if you've never seen is brilliant, the Athenian playwright Aristophanes makes a big deal of their beauty, their physical fitness and their sexual liberty. The Roman biographer Plutarch wrote a compendium of the cool stuff that Spartan women apparently said, entitled The Sayings of Spartan Women, which was full of pithy advice and witty one-liners and laconic stuff that would make Oscar Wilde and George Bernard Shaw wince. It was really quite cruel, but it was very smart. And Spartan maidens also benefited from a state education programme: literacy, athletics, hand-to-hand combat, dance and limited housekeeping. These unusually liberated girls were known to other Greeks as thigh flashers due to their immodest cut of their unusually short tunics. They enjoyed property and inheritance rights, unheard of anywhere else in Hellas. They engaged in same-sex relationships and were freed from manual labour thanks to the ownership of their own Hellas. But their liberty came at a price. Even as men were soldiers, women must be mothers. Motherhood was considered a patriotic duty in Sparta. The only Spartans who received grave markers were men who died in combat and women who died in childbirth. Those who made the ultimate sacrifice for the state. The conventions of marriage night also reflected the young male Spartans' experience of sex during the agoge. You think that the whole previous lot was weird, wait till you get into the marriage. So the bride's head would be shaved like a 12-year-old boy's. She'd be dressed in a man's clothes. The husband would sneak out of his barracks at night to visit his wife in secret and attempt to return to the lads undiscovered. And so the relationship would continue. It was almost a game, with both participants trying to outwit the Spartans' comrades. Marriage and childbirth was mandated by the state, but bigamy rules were flexible. If a man or woman wanted to sire or bear children with another full Spartan, then contracts for such could be arranged without stigma. Coupling was entirely orientated towards producing and supporting a new generation of elite Spartans. So the question arises, how many Spartan homoioi were there? I think we should perform a little experiment. So, would you all stand up? Let's see if we can identify the class of 2017. Indulge me. Okay. So please sit down if you had a difficult or medicalised birth or were born by caesarean section. You're dead. If any of you need glasses, a hearing aid, or had a birth defect of any description. You're exposed. If you had a serious childhood illness or accident or were hospitalised as a child. Any? Looking good. You didn't participate in team sports, junior martial arts, athletics or PE at school. Be honest. Okay, you didn't make it to the agoge. You have never been a cadet, a scout, in the armed forces, reservist, TA, trained in a martial art, wrestling, fencing, boxing, athletics, or trained for any team games of any kind.
What? I'm just going to say that.
You didn't survive the Agoge. How many have you got left standing? How many?
No. 0.
None of you made it through. None of you made it to adulthood in Sparta. Congratulations. To be fair though, neither did I. I died in birth. So no one in this room actually makes it. That's how brutal it was. If you consider yourselves in context, when I did this in Brighton, there were 100 people in the room, there were 6 people standing at the end. Yeah? It was brutal. So what did you do other than wage war and work out with the boys, presuming that you survived, which you didn't? Well, you certainly didn't spend any money. The homioi were provided for by the state. The monetary exchange was done with small iron bars, considered worthless outside of Sparta. Unlike the Athenian silver obol, which was currency in the Hellenic world, and it was the kind of the ancient equivalent of the US dollar, it was accepted pretty much everywhere. So Spartans' personal wealth and the envy it created undermined good order and encouraged habros, or feminising luxury. 3 things that really marked out habros for the Greeks were unusually shaped hats, sleeves, and worst of all, trousers. You wear trousers? You've clearly been hanging out with Persians too much. But there were perks if a Spartiate lived to 30. He could leave his barracks and live with his wife and family, though life was still about training for and waging war, so much of the household was still conducted by women. He was also expected to participate in Spartan's peculiar political system that involved lots of shouting in the assembly and being told what to do by old men. A bit like Westminster, really, isn't it? So the Greek calendar was also littered with religious festivals, involving days and weeks, ritual observances. The Spartans, as you might expect, observed these restrictions to these high and holy days with absolute fervour. They were an extremely religious society, perhaps more so, or certainly in their practice, than any other Greek state at the time. And these religious practices were powerful social functions, creating community, reinforcing age and gender roles. And linked to these ritual observances were athletic and military competitions, where Spartans could demonstrate their resilience and prowess, but they also involved communal dance and art and music, which were 2 art forms that were highly praised in Lacedaemon. Spartan armies certainly didn't march when the gods were being honoured, which is something the Persians figured out 10 years earlier after their defeat at Marathon in 490. So in 480, they invaded. And they invaded during the solemn festival of the Olympic Games, when the Greek nations were sworn to peace. The Greeks were very fractious, they warred amongst themselves constantly, but every year there would be a major athletic competition in praise of one of the gods. When that was on, no one could raise a spear. Because of this, only a tiny detachment from each of the polis was mobilised to resist the Persians. And so 300 Spartans, along with several thousand other allied hoplites, which don't get their own movie, engaged the Persians at a strategic choke point at Thermopylae, stalling the land forces while the Athenian fleet moved to engage the Persian navy at Salamis, which is another story. When the dire tactical situation at Thermopylae was revealed, the Spartan king Leonidas was undismayed. While his fellow commanders argued for retreat and cried for reinforcements, he was reported to have calmly stated, "It would be unseemly to leave the post we have come to defend." And that was it. Laconic, you see. But he wasn't alone. This is important. The Thespians and Thebans agreed, and they stayed, competing in courage with the Spartans. But they don't get their own movie either. Because maybe, 472 doesn't ring quite as well as 300. But the Athenian historian Herodotus tells us that on the final day of the battle, when their allies had fled and death was inevitable, the Spartans awoke, breakfasted and exercised as usual. And they groomed their long hair, they cleaned their gear in preparation for receiving their Persian guests. They had been ordered to slow the Persian advance, and that is what they would do. They made a competition of their bravery, a challenge to others to be more courageous, more obedient, more dignified, to relish battle and to hold their place in the line until the end. Eutaxia. And when they died, it would be a beautiful death. And so begins the legend. So how much of it is true? Well, I don't know. You're now better equipped to judge. But we'll finish with an afterthought from our friend and Sparta's enemy, the historian Thucydides. And he writes, "We must remember that one man is much the same as another, and that he who is best is trained in the severest school. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Yeah, that was fantastic. I was pretty much an ignoramus when it comes to Sparta history. In fact, Greeks and that part of the world generally. We had a talk, I think it was last month, Jenna gave a talk about Pythagoras. So anyway, I'm going to throw the floor open to any questions for Ken. Spartan, Pythagorean. I mean, is there a link? I don't know. Am I way out in my history?
At the same time.
Really?
Yeah, about 500 BC.
Yeah, a bit of a different emphasis.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I mean, a horrifically brutal regime. I think is essentially.
Absolutely, yeah. I've got to say, my bias is I think they're bastards. I think they're fascinating bastards, but they were horrid.
Yeah.
So I'm always going to be a bit more pro-Athenian. They were horrid too, but I will admit my bias right now. But yes, they are a fascinating culture, the Lacedaemons, so yeah, please do. If you have any further questions, do ask.
Very, very, very brutal. Any questions for Ken? We see some of their culture, don't we? Or some of that philosophy, the sort of the taking the children and training them very young to be warriors. So that is played out still.
Well, the Spartan Mirage has persisted, and a lot of very extreme cultures in our own history, in the early modern and modern period, have looked to Sparta as examples of patriotism, loyalty to the state. I mean, there's a reason that the redcoats of the British Army wore red coats. It's because it emulated the Spartan cloak.
I thought you were going to refer to the redcoats of Butlins then.
Yeah. They're trained at birth to kill. Some of the less pleasant regimes of the 20th century, ones who really liked really shiny uniforms and marching up and down in straight lines, they didn't just take their emphasis from Rome, they also took it from Sparta. There's a very close correlation between authoritarianism and the Spartan ideal. And the Spartan Mirage has persisted because people can select whatever bit of it they like to emphasise. So you get things like the Spartan race, where you've got people basically doing a 10-mile assault course. It's got very little to do with Sparta, but it's a concept, it's an ideal of endurance and persistence, strength. How much that actually relates to what the Spartans got up to, we just don't know. We don't know how they trained particularly, we just know that they suffered privation.
Would you say that that's because it more? Would you say that idea has more basis in the fact that we don't know that much about them in terms of what they said about themselves? Your common man, essentially, or the slaves that existed in the Spartan time. Because you said you don't have that much evidence of that. Do you think that ideal has stuck because we don't know, or because of what we do know from outside sources?
I think the ideal has stuck largely because the sources that we've got were written by elite. And the elite will always favour what suits their own political agenda. So the elites who were writing in Athens about Sparta were often described as laconophiles. Considering that Athens was a radical democracy at the time, having an oligarchical bent was a very negative thing. But Athens had only been a democracy for a comparatively short period of time, and the oligarchic elite, the old families, very much wanted to return to that way of life. So we're looking at Sparta as an ideal oligarchy. Those sources have persisted throughout history, and we still refer to them. So I think there's a component of both. There's a component of what we don't know and what we've been given. And from that, people have selected. Plutarch was a Roman. And by the time he was writing comparative biographies. So he would select a famous Roman and a famous Greek. And then would write a comparative biography referring against each other, so you could see what is best and what has been pollinated in Roman culture from Greek culture. And Roman culture very much informs all of our educational system, and has done since the early Middle Ages, really. And before that, certainly, and then there was a bit of a break for some Saxons, and then the early Middle Ages. So we've inherited the ideal of Sparta, and because we don't know, you're right, we have so many voices omitted, we can only base it on what we've got. And people, again, will cherry pick the things they like. That rambled. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Any final? I'm conscious of time because we did unfortunately start later than I had hoped, and that won't normally happen. But are there any final questions for Ken, or are we sort of getting towards 20 to 11? I think so. Which is a little late. Right, no, I think that's it. Thank you so much.